Hi everyone, this is Denise with Liquid Color, and today we are going to be starting a new series called Endangered Species Paint with Me. Now the start date for this series actually turned out to be rather serendipitous. As many of you guys know, I've been planning this series for a while now, and it just so happened that my last series had to be pushed back a bit because of my show in April, and well, I guess the stars must have all aligned as today is in fact Endangered Species Day. I didn't know that when I was planning the release date, but I'm happy that it ended up that way. So I'll take it as a good omen for this series, and I hope that you will all enjoy it. My drive for doing this series is twofold. I've been wanting to do more painting tutorials for a while now, and many of you know that I was a zoo educator before I was an artist. I always strive to incorporate animal education in my daily life, whether that be from dropping little factoids into my art classes here and there, or having a conversation with whoever I happen to be around that day, or even just simply sharing my artwork that is obviously heavily inspired by my love for animals. Throughout this series, I'm hoping to bridge that gap between my two passions even more. While showing you watercolor techniques, I'll also be sharing information that I've absorbed for nearly the past 15 years in my professional life. And I'll tell you what, I may not be able to fix a car or do things that are deemed quote-unquote useful by most mainstream standards, but my brain is a sponge for all things animal and watercolor, and I cannot wait to share more of that with you. I gave a lot of thought to what species would be included in this series. I wanted to show you a variety of animal species from different animal groups and habitats, while also covering a large range of conservation topics, while all the while making sure that it's something that you actually want to watch me paint. After coming up with the possible animals for the series that I wanted to do, I put the question forward to my patrons, and they helped me narrow it down through a poll so that I could know what they wanted to see as well. I've taken as many of the popular votes from that poll as possible while still keeping my core foundation goals for the series of incorporating unique conservation topics into every episode. I should also mention that the series was only intended to be 8 weeks, but it is now 12 because reasons. So without further ado, shall we? Today we are going to be taking a look at elephants. I first was going to do just African elephants, as I typically find them to have more aesthetically pleasing proportions to work with artistically, and because I happen to have a number of photos of them from Africa to use as references. However, as I started to think about the conservation topics that I wanted to tie to this episode, I really wanted to be careful not to overlook Asian elephants as well. I think people are generally familiar with what an elephant is, unlike perhaps some of the other animals that we're going to cover later in this series. But as for telling our two species apart, I think the biggest thing to note is the shape of their ears. They have actually done a great job at visually showing us what the difference is, because African elephant ears are shaped like, well, Africa, and Asian elephant ears are shaped like India. It's pretty handy. Before we get too much further, I do want to address how these videos are going to work in terms of logistics. I'm going to be talking about the species and conservation for the majority of the episode, while I have gone through the entire video to include text below to explain what I'm doing in the painting itself. I'm going to try and make these videos as close to real time as possible, but this one in particular is at double speed because, guys, elephants are really hard. Usually when I do a painting on this channel, I jump right into things, but I am not joking or over-exaggerating when I say I painted over half a dozen elephants and recorded 6 hours or more of footage before I got to recording this one. A lot of you have been following me on Instagram and giving me feedback for the ones that I did prior to this video, and for that I thank you greatly. However, due to my own unrest about the quality of the video, I decided to push through a migraine and paint one more version to see if I could really seal the deal on what I thought would be the clearest painting tutorial for you all to follow, especially while I'm talking about conservation. I'll show a couple other versions of the paintings that I did prior to this one at the end of the video, and they will be available in my Etsy shop with a portion of the sales going towards elephant conservation, but I'll fill you more in on that later. I didn't have a great reference for my own photograph collection, so for this painting I took to Pixabay to find a reference. However, I was still unhappy with the selection that I had for Asian elephants, so then I turned to Google. I found this image of a joyous looking elephant taken by a Canadian photographer by the name of Ron Boyley that really inspired me. After some email exchanges, he kindly agreed to let me release this video using the painting that I created from his photo as a reference. In my great elephant picture search of 2017, I sincerely apologize for settling on a photo that is not copyright free for your own use after half a dozen elephant paintings and 2 days of painting that I was just completely unhappy with. I knew that I needed to find an image that personally inspired me. I encourage you to find a pose on Pixabay or another photo reference site that really suits your own personal preferences as well, and then join alongside me using the same techniques that I'm using here. In future videos, I promise not to be so picky and to choose images that you can directly follow along with me as a reference as we paint together. Although Ron's images are copywritten to him, he did agree to me selling this finished painting in my Etsy shop with all of the profits going to elephant conservation. Ron has a gallery on wonderground.com as well as his own endangered species fundraising campaign through some collectible pins at winnipegpincollectorsclub.com. If you are interested in supporting his local Canadian wildlife through the purchase of these $5 pins, please contact him directly. I will put all of his contact information in the description below. Before we talk about Asian elephants and some of the lesser known issues that are causing their decline specifically, let's talk about what I believe more people are familiar with surrounding elephants, specifically African elephants, and that of course is poaching for ivory. Before I start mentioning statistics, I do want to let you all know that I have researched everything that I say in these videos to the best of my ability, and the sources that I'm using are ones that I trust from my time spent as a zoo educator. However, research and findings change over time, and numbers disagree on the internet, so you're welcome to, of course, research all this on your own to find out more information too. So a little bit more recently, the Wildlife Conservation Society founded a movement called 96 Elephants. So I'm going to have you try and guess what that 96 stands for before I tell you. In 1989, a ban on international trade of ivory was introduced by the Convention on International Trade and Endangered Species for Wild Fauna and Flora, or much more simply put, CITES for short. At that time, hundreds of thousands of elephants were being killed every year for their ivory. Despite the ban, there's still a tremendous market for ivory, particularly in Asian countries, which has impacted both African and Asian elephants. Today, that annual number for African elephants is much lower, but irreversible damage is already and is still being done. So that 96 in the name for 96 elephants stands for the 96 elephants that are killed every single day for the ivory trade. Now I think right here is a good time to mention that there is going to be a lot of overwhelming information in this series. A lot of it sounds really, really tragic, and it is on many, many levels, but I promise you that I will never bring up a conservation issue without mentioning what it is that you and your community can do to help. This series is about shedding light on these issues that may be new to you and give you some ideas on how to help, but the very last thing that I want to do is impart fear or hopelessness onto you when these animals need us to be hopeful in this time. So what is it that we can do for African elephants? A very straightforward one is that if you are ever traveling somewhere where trinkets are carved out of ivory and available for sale, never ever purchase them as souvenirs. This directly impacts the demand for ivory and incentivizes poachers to keep doing what they're doing. If you're not big on travel or already know not to buy ivory, you can also head on over to 96elephants.org and read about how you can take action anywhere from spreading the word to donating or to contacting your local state government to help push the cause forward. Alright, so let's get to this pretty girl in the painting. Asian elephants are smaller than their African cousins. Male and female African elephants have tusks, whereas only some male Asian elephants have those large tusks. For this reason, the ivory poaching that I mentioned is not as big of a threat for Asian elephants. However, Asian elephants are actually doing quite a bit worse than their savanna cousins in Africa. Asia is the most densely populated continent on the planet, and with that comes a much larger need for not only housing but also for food, meaning crop and livestock land, as well as raw materials. There's not a lot that I can do all the way from my home in California to impact that situation. However, similarly to how I mentioned not to buy ivory when you're traveling, you can also help Asian elephants by not participating in live elephant tourism industry when you are traveling to Southeast Asia. Riding an elephant seems like it could be the highlight of a trip to Southeast Asia for any animal lover. And of course, who doesn't want a picture of a selfie with an elephant, right? Well, actually, as an animal lover, it's probably the last thing that you want to do. I don't want to go into the doom and gloom details here, but in a short little nutshell, this industry is known for taking wild elephant infants away from their mothers, which, if you know anything about the intelligence and the family bonds that elephants have, you'll know that this is traumatic enough. Then, the life that they lead after being taken away from their families include being confined, beaten, or even starved into obedience for tourism revenue. And while we're at this particular topic of being confined and whatnot, I highly, highly discourage anyone from attending circuses, wherever you're living, because a lot of them employ these same practices with their animals. There are a growing number, however, of ethical elephant sanctuaries in Southeast Asia, and if meeting an elephant is on your bucket list, I highly encourage you to look into one of these facilities instead of the really sketchy ones with questionable morals. A lot of people's knee-jerk reactions to having lots of animals, particularly large ones, in captivity is to want to release them back into the wild. However, this is an incredibly complicated aspect to any captive wild animal. At the most basic level, most of these animals, while not domesticated, are in no way equipped to survive fully and healthily in the wild without some kind of human care. Furthermore, even if we could assure that they would be able to survive on their own, there is nowhere near enough wild left to release them back into. Our planet is overcrowded, it just is, and releasing these animals back into the wild would most certainly seal their fate in regards to human encroachment, a lack of habitat, lack of food, etc. I really wanted to dedicate an entire episode to the topic I'm about to lead myself into, but I don't think there's a better place than right here to do that, and that is talking about zoos. Now, I was a zoo educator for 12 years. I am very aware that there are people out there, some of you watching this video, that think I must be a complete and utter hypocrite for warning people about tourism practices while also having worked at a zoo, a place where wild animals are also held captive. There was something that I used to say in defense of this, and I will never ever stop believing it's true. Those of us who work in accredited zoos, particularly in fields of education and conservation, would love nothing more than to put ourselves out of a job. We would love to not need to share our knowledge with our communities about conservation efforts or teach people how to interact with their world. We would love for every animal to have a safe place in the wild to live out their lives in peace and happiness. But unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in right now. Hundreds of years ago, zoos were originally created by royals and people with a lot of money to show off their wealth and means by saying, hey look, I paid someone to go capture this tiger, look at it, isn't it pretty? My heart completely breaks that that is the history of where zoos came from. And today there are still way too many organizations that run zoos purely for profit or at the expense of the animals. But this is not the type of zoo that I worked for. If you're an avid zoo goer in the US and even in some parts of Europe, you may have noticed that some facilities are accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, or AZA for short. There are other organizations too in other parts of the world, but I can only speak for this one in particular. AZA is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of conservation, education, and science in zoological facilities. Only 230 institutions are accredited worldwide, most of those in the US, out of the thousands that exist. Most of the population is completely unaware of the efforts that are being taken every single day, not only to provide the best absolute possible care for the animals that they're responsible for, from nutrition to physical exercise to mental stimulation, but also breeding programs that they're involved in that do release animals back into the wild, that are doing research in the field, and that are directly working with conservationists in other countries to find solutions to problems that the animals face in their wild habitats. I could tell you so many awe-inspiring stories from meeting with my colleagues from around the country at conventions that I attended while I was with an AZA accredited facility, and many of my favorites are about new and innovative training programs in which animals are actually taught to be active participants in their own care rather than having to be restrained for medical procedures. The trust that I've seen in some of these animals for their caretaker is breathtaking. I don't know if I'm allowed to quote specifics from other facilities, but let me just say that the willingness that some of these animals have to allow their handlers to do an invasive or painful but necessary procedure on them while they're conscious for their own health is just one of the types of things that these professionals are working for in these facilities every single day. So please, if you are someone who is carrying this hatred for zoos simply for being zoos, please take the time to recognize that not all zoos are created equal and that so many of these professionals who have dedicated their lives to taking care of these animals are doing everything that they can. And if you want to learn more about AZA, you can check them out at aza.org. Whew, okay, I am sorry about that. I just wanted to make sure I got that in there at some point in this series. I won't mention it again. I just really hope that it's not coming off as preachy. It's such a fine line between something like this. I just hope that you all know that my heart is in the right place. All right. Okay, I'm going on page like 4 of my notes into my elephant essay here. I feel like I'm back to school cramming for a paper. I have one more thing that I wanted to touch on today, and then I promise that I will stop talking your ears off. I wanted to go back to the Asian elephants and how we can help them being stuck all the way on the other side of the world. And we can help them and all the animals that share their habitats by learning more about the palm oil crisis. I'm sure that many of you have actually heard about this before. It's becoming more well known in the recent years, but for those of you who haven't or have heard about it but don't know what it's about, let's go over a couple of things. Palm oil is an edible oil from the African palm oil tree, and they were given their name originally from West Africa, but they were brought to Southeast Asia by the British, and from there on forward were traditionally planted on farms across Southeast Asia. However, the recent health concerns about trans fatty acids spread across the globe pretty quickly, and palm oil became in high demand over hydrogenated oils, and they're also very cheap to produce, and they're very efficient crops to boot. That all sounds fine and dandy for the health of humans that are consuming them, but in the last 5 years, the demand for palm oil in the US alone has tripled, and this has come at a devastating cost to rainforests. In order to keep up with demands, millions of hectares of rainforest have been clear-cut, displacing elephants, orangutans, rhinos, tigers, and other native animals out of their homes. And worse news is that palm oil isn't just found in foods, it's also found in cosmetics, toiletries, shampoos, toothpaste, and it's not always easy to recognize on labels. Companies can list the ingredients by many different names that are all derived from palm oil, so you might not even know it's in the products that you use, including names can include palm kernel oil, sodium lauryl sulfate, which you might have heard in other discussions about it being a separate health concern, stearic acid, and many, many others. You can find all the names that palm oil goes by with a simple Google search. The simplest response would just be to say, okay, I'm just going to boycott all the products that have palm oil in them. And there are great lists that have been circulating around recently about Halloween candy around Halloween time for candy buying guides that are really, really great to let you know which candies are made with no palm oil. Wow, that was a hard sentence to get out for some reason. Brands like Hershey's, Kit Kats, and Reese's all make the list of palm oil-free candy. However, like all conservation issues, it is a lot more complicated than that. Many farmers rely on their palm oil crops to survive, but there is more that you can do to help reward sustainable farmers and also protect wildlife at the same time. The World Wildlife Fund has created an awesome resource called the Palm Oil Buyer's Scorecard. This keeps track of the companies who have pledged to using only sustainable palm oil and whether or not they've kept that promise. Unfortunately, I found out that 2 of my primary grocery retails are on that naughty list, so I am going to have to keep looking for other options. However, rather than boycotting an entire store if that's not feasible for you in your area, similarly actually to like it is for me, you can just do your due diligence by checking labels and making sure that those ingredients are not on your products. All right, guys. I think I did it. I think that that's everything that I wanted to cover this week. I hope that you enjoyed learning more about the troubles that elephants face, but more importantly, what you can do to help them, and of course, some fun painting techniques for them as well. If you are interested in owning this specific painting, you can find it on Etsy alongside two of my other watercolor elephants that will be shown at the end of this video. The profits from this painting will all go to 96 elephants per the wishes of Ron and myself, and the other two smaller elephant paintings will also result in me donating 50% of the profits to the same cause. These paintings will only be available in my shop for the next 2 weeks, after which time I will make that donation to 96 elephants. The leftover paintings will be donated to one of the many requests I get throughout the year for animal conservation fundraisers. Thank you so much in advance for supporting both local artists as well as global conservation efforts for elephants and other endangered species. Next week, we are going to be taking a look at the winter skate, a species that I myself need to do some reading up on. It's a critically endangered fish due to overfishing, and I will be happy to share some resources about sustainable seafood. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.